Hello and welcome to the season finale of Breaking Down the Madness, where we take a look at the Providence College men's basketball program. I'm your host, Brendan McGair, once again joined by Daniel James, a.k.a. the Warrior Friar. Dan, we got a lot to get to, from a season-ending loss to Kentucky at the NCAA tournament to the end of an era in terms of the head coach at Providence College. Just touching upon the Friars, first and foremost, it's been a crazy, maybe 96-hour stretch as we sit down and record this. The Friars, they went down to Greensboro, North Carolina, lost to a blue blood in Kentucky. And next thing you know, 2 days later, they find out they don't have a head coach that they've had in place for the last dozen years and was one of the key figures in bringing respectability to the program.
Yeah, I remember seeing a statistic that the Thursday and Friday of the March Madness tournament is historically the least productive time for people to get work done. And anyone who said that hasn't seen how little productive I've been this past Monday and Tuesday with the news about head coach Ed Cooley leaving the Providence Friars after 12 years and dealing with that coming off the loss of Kentucky. I've basically been living on Twitter and trying to catch up with news and be as informed as possible and just try to get my head around everything. I'm sure like most Friar fans have been.
No, it's, Ed Cooley walked off the floor at the Greensboro Coliseum late Friday night, it turned out to be his final time as the head coach. And, there was a lot of speculation surrounding Cooley and the program going to that week, just going back to last Sunday when we learned that the Friars were going to be dancing as an 11 seed, probably one of the last at-large bids to get into the NCAA tournament. And the local media asked Ed Cooley about speculation concerning his job, and he gets down to North Carolina on Thursday. He's asked once again about, his connections to Georgetown. And then after Friday, we saw, or the local media did, at least three different sides of Ed Cooley when he was asked about his future with the Providence College program. The first time he was asked in the Q&A session at the press conference, he said, "Next question," when asked about whether he would be on the bench next season at PC. And then as time went on, he started to soften his stance a little bit and became more reflective about the end of an era, it turned out to be.
Yeah. It's very interesting how things change in retrospect. At the time, I remember you and I talking about his sort of response to the media surrounding what we assumed to be at the time just rumors. And I thought he was playing a very calculated business game. He's not going to show his hand. He doesn't want to give up any negotiating power, any leverage that he might have going into the offseason to redo his contract, to get more money for himself, for his coaches, for the NIL, focus anywhere he feels need be focused for Providence. When the news actually came out that he was leaving, all of that gets re-examined, right? All of a sudden, you're looking at everything in a new lens, and that no comment, the hard stance about not answering that question, not diffusing it even more so. I mean, it's the lesson in PR first and foremost, how to not handle yourself if you're planning on switching jobs. And in a way, he almost tipped his hand off going so far in the other direction that now everyone's looking back with a much more jaded and careful eye, seeing that, hey, the signs were there. And I think people are feeling like he did it wrong. And we're very frustrated by the way he handled it. And those people are justified. I think there was a much better way to handle it, especially given the way his team had played over the past few weeks. And I think that ultimately it's going to be something that in retrospect is going to be much more heavily scrutinized than if he had just ended up staying, a tough end of the season, we'll figure it out, we move forward. Now it's going to be looked at in a very different light.
Ed Cooley had multiple opportunities before the NCAA tournament and right after the Kentucky loss to say, deflect everything. And he did it. So that only fanned the flames even more. And I'll ask you, Dan, the Friars ended the season on a 4-game losing streak. And ironically, their last win this season was at Georgetown, which is where Ed Cooley is heading. The program, the players, they could say all they want that it was not a distraction to the program. When you look at the results on the floor, you just can't help but feel that way, that, everyone was knowing that potentially Ed Cooley had one foot out the door and on his way to a Big East rival.
Absolutely. Anyone who says it's not a distraction is honestly, they're kidding themselves, and they're playing the PR game as best they can. It's a response you want to give when asked that kind of question, when put in that kind of position. But let's be honest with ourselves. It absolutely is a distraction. It would be weirder if it was not a distraction, because the head coach of the team, let's look at the guys for a second. They're spending almost every day with him. They're learning from him. They're looking up to him. He's their dude. He's the guy who's being not just a coach to them, but a mentor, but a guide. And to have him have one foot out the door, if we're able to see that in retrospect based on the way that Cooley was responding in post-game press conferences and his body language on the sideline, if people are able to put those pieces together, imagine what the players who see him every day and interact with him 100 times more than any of us were able to pick up on. So of course it was a distraction. It would be foolish to assume that it was not.
Dan, just the way that Ed Cooley, his time ended here with a 4-game losing streak where the Friars went from being a contender for the Big East regular season championship and getting as possibly as high as the number 2 seed at the Big East tournament to falling to an 11 seed and a first-round loss. Does that kind of overshadow what turned out to be 12 great years where he took the program to the NCAA tournament 7 times, he won a Big East tournament title, and he also won a regular season title and took the program to the Sweet 16 last year for the first time in 25 years. How the program finished the season cloud your thoughts on how Ed Cooley did as a whole in his tenure?
The irony is that it shouldn't, right? The man came into a program, and let's be honest with ourselves, the program was in horrible shape. He came into this program and he gave it not just new life, he brought it to heights that we hadn't seen, like you said, in 25 years, in decades, in years. We had not seen that type of sustained success. So if he were any other coach, I would say him going out this way, it's going to leave some bitterness, some anger, but it's going to be understood. That said, he always billed himself as, this is my dream job. It's us, we together, Friars, whatever, forever. It was always a slogan. It was always a campaign. He was always highlighting that he was going to be the dude, right? And when we talk about the dude, we talk about the guys that, hey, it's the Jim Boeheims of the world. It's the Coach Calhouns. It's the guys who have been there for decades and built something. And yeah, sure, Boeheim, Calhoun, infinitely more success than what Cooley saw. However, Providence fans were more than understanding of that because they felt they found their guy who was going to get them through the good times and the bad times. So for him to leave, having built that over 12 years, it's not just a coach moving on to a next job. It's a betrayal to the ethos that he had built in the program that the fans responded to, and quite frankly, the program so desperately needed and wanted. The Big East is a conference built on their coaches. It is a conference that is built on the charisma, the talent, the drive, the energy of the coaches first and foremost. And we had a guy who fit that persona and was elevated and seemed to embrace and reciprocate that feeling that he wasn't going anywhere. So for him to change his tone, for him to suddenly just leave, and not just leave, but in the way that he handled it, that is a betrayal. I do understand the anger of fans. I do understand that frustration.
Another key Cooley slogan, divine providence, things like that, Dan, they take a hit when, the ending like it did happen for Ed Cooley after 12 great years. But let's talk about what has happened. Ed Cooley going to a rival school, not within the conference. I think maybe Friar fans would have maybe digested it if this was 2019 and Ed Cooley went to Michigan, a top 10 brand nationally, or Ohio State, for example. But for him to go to Georgetown University, how much is that maybe a sign of an act of betrayal in terms of, like you talked about, something that we've never seen in the Big East, and it's a long and storied history.
It changes the way you think about not just Ed Cooley, but also the way you think about your conference mates. This is a conference that, let's not forget, we're here today because this 7 basketball schools said enough with the football, enough with the defections, enough with the ACC coming and trying to stick their hands on our plate and take our food. Enough with it. We are going to make our own way, and we're going to look out for each other as we do it. So for Georgetown to essentially turn coat and say, well, the success of all of us is important, but mine is a little bit more important than yours. So I'm going to take what you have and I'm going to do you dirty on it. That doesn't bode well for the conference. That certainly doesn't bode well for Georgetown. And it's not going to create the rivalry that I think the Georgetown fans are hoping for. It's going to create a jadedness. There's a rivalry with UConn. There's a rivalry with St. John's, with Xavier, because they're fun teams to play. They're exciting games. With Georgetown, it's just bitterness and resentment. That's not fun. That's not what this is about. It's not about what should be off the court. It should be on the court. And unfortunately, Georgetown has created a precedent that what happens off the court is going to be whatever is in their best interest, and forget everyone else, including your own conference mates. And that's not something I think fans are going to respond to the way that I think Georgetown fans are hoping it will build a rivalry.
It sounds like, almost Georgetown be damned about what they think of what they're doing. They're looking out for their own interests in terms of trying to weaken a rival, so to speak, where we're going to go take, the school's most important resource, the most visible man, a person that was responsible for a lot of winning, and we're going to bring him to the fold right now. So not only are we getting a good coach, we're also, quote unquote, weakening a rival, because all of a sudden they're going to have to maybe go through a rebuilding process in getting someone new. We've already seen with the news that Ed Cooley has left, that a couple of 2023 recruits have decommitted, and Drew Fielder and Garway Dual. We're still waiting to see on the third one, in Donovan Santoro. But no mistake, there's a ripple effect. It could affect current players like Bryce Hopkins, Devin Carter, and Corey Floyd Jr. Players that transferred in using their one-time transfer rule. There's nothing to say that those three players can hop back in the transfer portal and claim hardship, because their coach that brought them to campus, he's left. But let's take a listen to head athletic director Steve Napololo, who met with the local media on Monday when the news became official that Ed Cooley was heading to Georgetown, and his thoughts on what Georgetown did.
I'm letting you know. It's not something that Providence College would have ever done, and I don't think it's a good look for the conference.
When you say acting head coach, why is that experience necessary to come in and hit the ground running?
I just feel this is a league that's a beer. If you think about it as the coaches, I just saw Coach Pitino get hired at St. John's. You have some of the best coaches. It's the best basketball conference in the country. 3 teams are in the Sweet 16, but we're going to get a great coach. Could be a young coach, could be a long experienced coach, but I'm really excited moving forward. We have all the infrastructure. We're going to continue to invest. We want to do things at the highest level. We're going to be really successful in name, image, and likeness. There's nothing we don't have to be successful here at the highest level at Providence College.
Well, it's a lot of meat on the bone per se, but the confidence that Steve Napololo is portraying is that Providence College will be just fine. We might have lost a coaching icon, someone who might have had his own statue outside the Friar Wayne Development Center, along with Dave Gavin and Joe Mullaney. I think that's officially, we can put that idea to rest. But Steve is confident that they're able to get someone in place to keep the program moving forward. And one name that I'm sure we've all heard is Kim English, the current George Mason head coach. It seems like he's moved to the top of the list of people who can replace Ed Cooley. He's a young, up-and-coming coach. It kind of sounds familiar. It's that story. The only thing that's probably different about King English is that he's not around from this. He's not from this area.
Yeah, I like
Your
the
thoughts,
prospect
Dan?
I like the prospect of Coach English coming in. Admittedly, I haven't learned much about him until the last 36 hours when I heard his name. I know he had been doing pretty well at George Mason. It's a mid-major guy. We're calling him up to the high majors if he gets hired. So I think there is an opportunity here. What I think is interesting, it's something I've heard a lot from fans, is that they feel like Providence is now going to become a stepping stone. So we bring a guy in from a mid-major conference. He succeeds here. 5 years later, he's out the door to another conference. I don't know if that's true anymore. I think that getting the right guy, the right fit to be successful is important, but we're at a new level of success now. That's one thing undeniably Cooley brought us. He made us a consistent NCAA tournament team. He made us a consistent 20-win season team. He made us consistently at the top half of the Big East. Those expectations, not only on the court, but also the opportunities off the court, that's going to come into play significantly for the new head coach. And I don't see this as necessarily the same sort of stepping stone that it was back in the early 2000s, late 90s, when we didn't have the infrastructure to compete with the football schools, when we didn't have the on-court performance to compete with the schools in the Big East that were constantly going to the Elite Eight, the Final Four, winning national championships. It's a new era and a new landscape. And I think the competitiveness and the parity not only is much more equalized in the conference, Providence now has the infrastructure to succeed in that conference alignment. So I think that the idea of a stepping stone, maybe it's still there, maybe not, but I don't think we should be as quick to write that off. And I do think if we bring a guy in like Coach English, he's going to take every opportunity, not just to win, but to pick up where Cooley left off and bring us to more Sweet 16s, more Elite Eights, more Final Fours. Let's put more banners up in the dunk or the amp now. Let's make this program and continue to grow it, not just maintain it or take a half step down. Let's keep going where we left off.
I think it's fair to say that Ed Cooley took a lot with him to Washington, D.C., but things he did not take. The Wayne Friar Development Center, that's still there. $30 million opened in 2018. He's not taking 10,000 season ticket holders, which is what the number was this past year. He's not taking a student body that, we could talk about their behavior or sorts, but, they definitely have made for an incredible atmosphere at the Amica Mutual Pavilion. They're all staying. The infrastructure is here. I completely agree with you, Dan, that whoever comes in, it's not going to be like when Ed Cooley took over in March 2011, when you had APR issues with players and lazy practice habits left over from the previous regime led by Keno Davis. I think this is a good job. I think the notoriety will help build the program moving forward. And like we said, the infrastructure is there. The tools are there. It's just about getting the players here to succeed.
Agreed 100%.
And I think that's going to be, we're going to put the wrap on this final episode of Breaking Down the Madness, looking at Providence College basketball. Should be intriguing times, to say the least, as we await the word on the next head coach. But for myself and Daniel James, a.k.a. the Warrior Friar, thanks for watching, everyone.